Hey, good afternoon, rather good evening. We're almost done with this day, so we're here to talk about spatial audio for 360 video and cinematic VR experiences. I'm Varun Nair. I'm a technical lead on the 360 audio team at Facebook. I'm going to briefly talk about our work to help people make high-quality spatial audio for 360 videos and VR experiences and how that propagates across the Facebook and Oculus video ecosystem and also beyond it. After that, I'll be joined by all these amazing people on stage to just talk about some of these concepts and their experiences. Each of them have done amazing work with audio and VR over the past few years, and they've all got interesting perspectives on where this is going and what it needs to become and what we should be doing to make things better. So talking about spatial audio, what is it? There's been a lot of discussions about the importance of it over the past few years. As VR has gained prominence, there's been a lot of talk about it helping immersion, being one of the key things, essentially, to help with immersion and that sense of presence. Technically, it helps you believe that a sound actually exists within your virtual space. So if there's a sound off towards your left, as you look around the space with head tracking, it would react to your head movement. So if you got something off towards your left, as you look around to turn towards it, it would be in front of you, or it would be behind you, or above you. And all of that happens over a regular pair of headphones. It all happens through software to just help increase that level of immersion. But things do change when we're working with 360 video experiences, which I'll get into in a bit. But before that, I'd like to clarify two key concepts. We talk about this within interactive game-like environments, but it also comes to play within cinematic experiences and probably comes up more in our discussions. This differentiation between headlocked audio and spatialized audio. So headlocked audio is audio that is just stuck to your head. As you look around, it's always just there. So if there's a sound off towards your left, as you look around, it's always towards your left, or it's just stuck within that position in space. Whereas spatialized audio is sound that's out there in the space and belongs and is anchored within that virtual environment. So if that same sound is off towards your left, as you look towards it, it is now in front of you. This can be quite easily achieved within a game-like context because you've got full control of that system. But with video experiences, you've got bandwidth and performance and other considerations, and even the tooling that can impose limitations on this. Depending on the context, there have been lots of discussions about should you place and spatialize every single sound so that it's out there in the environment, or should you not spatialize certain elements like the voiceover, background score, and so on? That's an open question, and rather than it being a technical question with a technical answer, we believe that it's a creative choice. And you as a filmmaker, sound designer, a creative working within this medium, you need to have the choice to do what you think is best for the medium. So spatial audio support within our ecosystem and beyond it, using the tooling and specs we provide, helps you design both of these simultaneously, to have specific audio that is headlocked and other audio that can be spatialized. But when we actually come to dealing with video experiences, I keep hitting back. For video, it's quite different from game-like experiences. First off, when you're working with a fully interactive system realized with a game engine, you've got full control over where things are in space. You can easily query where objects are in space, where the camera is in space, and do quick calculations to do correctly and accurately spatialize sound within that visual context. But when you're working with live action video or a lot of 360 video, really, you don't have any of this metadata that you can latch onto. So it's quite a painstaking process to do all of that in post-production. And talking about audio post-production, we've got a long history, many decades of tooling, language, the creative language that we've developed over all these years to help us make better cinema, better films, and better entertainment. And it would be a shame if we wouldn't be able to translate a lot of these ideas into VR. So most of our effort has been in trying to leverage everything that we've done over the past so many years in post-production for linear media and translate that into a VR environment. And finally, once you're done with all this work, you want to be able to publish it and stream it across all these devices and platforms and ultimately reach the people who'd be able to consume such experiences. And doing that and ensuring that the quality and performance is consistent across all these devices can be a challenge. Unlike most games, which tend to be downloaded onto systems and then consumed. We also deal with a range of different devices, a whole range of Android devices, iOS devices, desktops, and browsers that need to be taken into consideration. So how do you ensure that this level of quality is maintained? To help with the audio post-production process, we've got a set of tools called the Spatial Workstation. It's widely in use by audio professionals to help design and create 360 videos with high-quality spatial audio. The Spatial Workstation is available and supported for major audio workstations such as Pro Tools, Reaper, and Nuendo. And what it helps you do is position sounds within a virtual space. It also ships with a 360 video player, so you can load up a 360 video, and that is automatically synchronized to your audio session. And you can then position each of your tracks as they exist in space. The key point here is that audio post-production for a long time has been this huge industry. Almost every film that you watch in the cinema has had most of the audio redone. So it's about leveraging all of that experience and knowledge we have across that industry and augmenting that further to bring all of the knowledge and tooling into VR. The key philosophy behind the Spatial Workstation is to help you iterate. Post-production is a creative process, and you need to be able to actually try out ideas, fail at them, try other things, and ultimately deliver what you think is important for whatever the creative output is, whether it's a short film, whether it's a longer piece, whether it's advertising. You need to, as an audio designer, you need to be in control of what you're doing. Spatial Workstation helps you work with a range of input formats, whether it's ambisonics, mono, stereo, multi-channel. You can add all of those different formats into your audio session and leverage the tools and also preview what it sounds like binaurally over headphones. Each of your audio tracks can then be positioned, and you can preview this in real time. A cool thing is the video player actually communicates with your audio workstation, so as you look around the video, whether it's in desktop view, whether you're just panning the video around, or if you've got an HMD hooked up, all of the information is piped back into your audio workstation, so you get real-time feedback on what your mix sounds like as you look around the space. This is crucial because you need to hear what the end user is going to hear or your audience is going to hear as you work with these tools. So the Spatial Workstation is completely free and can be downloaded from this link if you don't use it already. It's major effort on our part to push this quality bar higher. We want people to create better content, high quality audio experiences, and target all these platforms simultaneously. We've also built up an amazing support group over the past couple of months. We've got loads of people on the group from the community, many of our users contributing to this learning experience, helping each other understand what we actually need to achieve within VR and 360 video. And I've been quite pleased to see the level of interaction and openness within the community when it comes to helping people. It's pretty cool. So the goal here at all times has been to have a consistent spatial audio experience across the Facebook and Oculus ecosystem. What you mix within your audio workstation and what has been signed off by other creative stakeholders in your project should be exactly what you hear across all these platforms and devices. It's an extremely frustrating experience as a designer to finish a piece of work and then share something completely different on your target platform. And this extends beyond the Facebook and Oculus ecosystem as well. We've also got an SDK where you can integrate, which you can integrate within your video player or VR applications and get that same level of consistency within your own projects. So just a few weeks ago, we announced full spatial audio support across the Facebook and Oculus ecosystem. We started off by rolling out support for Facebook on Android and Gear VR, Oculus Video and Gear VR. And just last week, we started rolling out support for iOS. And in the coming weeks, we'll also be rolling out support for browsers. So in one shot, with a single mix, with a single experience, you can target all these many users, both on desktops, on mobile devices, and VR simultaneously, and have the same level of consistency across the whole ecosystem. The philosophy here is you need to mix once and publish everywhere. And we don't just limit it to the formats we use on our ecosystem. You can also export out to various other formats that are used by other content ecosystems. So that once again, you can mix once and publish everywhere. In the coming weeks, we'll be also pushing out an update for our encoder application, which is part of the tools, which helps you take your audio mix and export it out into a variety of formats. This will be updated soon so that you can drop in audio from the Spatial Workstation, any other ambisonic audio from your microphones, or any other tools. Also drop in your video file, and the encoder will output a single file with all the metadata, audio, and video that you can export, that you can upload to the Facebook ecosystem. If you've got existing videos that support the YouTube metadata spec, that will work as well. So at no level are you constrained to actually publish high-quality content across the ecosystem. The format used by the Facebook and Oculus ecosystem supports headlock audio, which I mentioned earlier, and also a hybrid higher-order ambisonic system that we've developed, which leverages maximum quality and within various bandwidth limitations to ensure that what you hear on the device is what you've heard while you mixed. So the new version of the encoder will be released soon, and in one shot, you'll be able to publish videos directly on Facebook, Oculus Video, and elsewhere within the ecosystem as well. We're going to have a short Q&A after the panel session. If you've got any further questions after that, feel free to grab me after the talk, and I look forward to meeting some of you and knowing you better. I'd like to invite Viktor, Kevin, Will, and JP up to the stage so we can follow up on this discussion and also focus on some of these concepts here, which I'll get into in a bit. So first question is, you've all been immersed within VR for the past few years, ever since this whole thing has come together. Would each of you be able to sort of quickly summarize what you think has actually changed positively? We hear a lot of discussions about this being the Wild West and not having various components to actually get good quality content out there, but we're starting to see that change. And from your perspective, what are the big things that have actually helped you deliver high-quality projects recently?
It definitely was the Wild West. I think we're slowly coming out of it, thanks in part to Spatial Workstation and Facebook support. When we started, the first experiences I did were with Felix and Paul. We were using quad stereo binaural microphones, so those 4 pairs of ears. Mixing, doing post-production, adding sound design was very complex. Now it's getting easier and easier, allowing iteration and publishing faster and all and this and that, so that we're really coming of age.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. I'll say it once, Jean-Pascal Beaudoin, that's French, now it's JP, I don't want to embarrass anybody. JP I'm head of technology at Felix and Paul Studios, and we also have a separate studio called Headspace, where we work with all directors and production companies.
Hello, I'm Kevin Bolen. I'm an audio designer at Skywalker Sound. Should we introduce everyone on the panel, or should I?
Sure. Yep. Just go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got one. Hi, I'm Will Littlejohn, sound design director at Facebook.
I'm Viktor Phoenix, sound supervisor and senior technical sound designer at Technicolor.
So I'll continue with Varun's question. I agree. It was the Wild West. My first experiences were sort of twofold. We're at one time working on a fully interactive room-scale VR project in a game engine and simultaneously working on a rendered 360 video series. And it wasn't really clear what tools we would utilize on either side. And so I believe the audio solution I suggested to our poor Unity developer was, I'm going to deliver you a certain number of channels, and I need you to mix these for me based on the rotation of the device, which was something new to them. But they did a homebrew solution which actually worked well. Come to find out, 2 years later, we not only have one tool that sort of emulates the rotation and the head tracking, but we have several tools, and so it's exciting to see the evolution of these things that we thought at one time we may have to make up ourselves or come up with these homebrew solutions, and now to see that there's actually like a rich and vibrant ecosystem that supports a variety of platforms and both a variety of technical and creative approaches.
I guess my perspective is a little bit different coming from the other side here. But one of the things that I've seen that's quite striking is simply the awareness of spatial audio. So when we first started experimenting and talking about this simply the concept of spatial audio and how it would bring much more to the sense of immersion was really a foreign concept to most people I talk to. And now, almost without exception, everyone I speak to about production of VR has an awareness of spatial audio, which is really thrilling to me. And also, again, echoing what these guys are saying, just having some more clear tool sets, and this is iterating very rapidly and allowing us to make things in a much easier way is just accelerating the entire process, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and Varun, when you mentioned earlier the tools that we have for games, I think what's really been fascinating about the progress of tools for DAW-based spatial audio is we're bringing these concepts that we've been working with in interactive media, nonlinear media, games, experiences, all together. And that's what makes VR pretty special. So the tools now are supporting what makes VR special. Across all platforms, across all DAWs as well. So it's just building up the whole ecosystem, bringing the concepts together, and supporting us with tools.
Kevin, if I may react on this, Victor. Actually, the challenge now, I feel, is there's still that huge gap between the DAW-based, timeline-based content and interactivity. So if you want to mix both, whatever cinematic VR is, we know that when you work with directors, and I'm sure you guys as content creators or just users of VR, people want more interaction. So we'll definitely have to get there. And right now, I personally find that getting the same level of control that you get when you're doing a cinema type of sound design and sound mix where everything is perfect. In gaming, it's almost there, but I would, so I feel there's this gap that we still need to cross.
Yeah, there's definitely elements going both directions, the object-oriented concept into the linear DAW, and then, you're right, the control over the mix.
So the interesting question, Victor, is who's going to cross over first?
Just going to rewind a bit, actually. So obviously the tools and everything else is getting better. You mentioned about the awareness of spatial audio. How do you actually work with your teams, right from the director, scriptwriter? How much of communication do you set up early on, and how has that influenced any of the projects you've done?
It's critical, those conversations, especially now that audio isn't limited by a field of view. It's become a really critical part of the planning process. And we found that working with directors and producers early on has always been important, but now audio is so critical it's almost blocking the development for truly immersive experiences.
Yeah, I can echo that as well. So at Skywalker, we have a reputation for cinematic sound, and we've been a reputable post-production provider. And what we're looking at is sort of organically growing, what we have been doing, leveraging these skills and experience that we have. But what does that mean in all these new platforms? And that means that we have to be more involved in the production and the pre-production and the pre-viz. And so, we've actually sort of approached it from two different directions, and we're hoping to meet somewhere in the middle. So on one side, we're sort of still providing post-production services for 360 video and cinematic VR, but we're also working as embedded audio developers for in-engine and interactive experiences. And really the big area that we need to sort of flesh out now is what is the process, in between, where I'm not necessarily involved in the very inception of the project like I may be for a fully interactive game engine experience using the traditional video game model. And I'm hopefully not just going to be the post-production service provider who is handed a mostly finished project, because we find that there are a lot of technical and creative opportunities that are best leveraged with spatial audio when we've actually been a part of that conversation during production and development. So that's actually one of the most exciting opportunities for me, is what can we take from traditional game audio and what can we take from traditional cinema sound, and what does that mean for these new platforms and these new narrative experiences?
Yeah, do you find that you need to actively push for these conversations to happen, or does it just seem like a natural process when these projects come together?
I find that all of our clients have been surprisingly receptive to any input that we can provide. Something that's, quite exciting is that, the audio production team, we used to be post-production, but in a way audio can lead the schedule. We can create a more fully realized experience for any experience with audio before the video has finished rendering or before the in-game mechanics have all been fleshed out. We have the opportunity to look at the script and see where opportunities for both sound and visual to come together are. And so everyone's actually sort of, at least in the case where we've been working with clients where maybe it's their first VR experience and we've worked on several, we actually have sort of a lot of things that we've learned and that we know that our clients have learned, and we're happy to share that knowledge, and there's actually a great receptiveness to that. And so audio can actually speak to other things than just audio, and it actually helps the projects come together in a great way.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well. Internally for us, we're doing a lot of exploration around new types of experiences, and really just talking to directors and talking to the creative content folks really before the actual concepts are fleshed out at all, or helping to inform what the concepts are. So audio is literally something that's important before the project even is scoped. That's what we're seeing, and it's really exciting to be able to bring the new capabilities. This is what we can do now, which then will actually change the trajectory of the project before it even starts. And I think that we'll be seeing more and more of that, and as this great conjunction comes together. Because I agree that really both of these approaches, the linear and the procedural or in-game, are really the sum are greater than the parts here. So something, as they come together, we're going to have really some really amazing new types of experiences. And how those workflows happen are constantly in flux, and will be developing very quickly here, I imagine, over the next several years.
Yep.
Thank you. There's a paper from Randy Tom, seminal paper in sound design called, correct me if I'm wrong, you should know, called Designing a Movie for Sound, is that correct? Where Randy Tom argues for a better collaboration between sound departments and directors, and basically the best sound design is done by the screenwriters and directors, right? I mean, we can sugar or pimp a project, but the best scenes are written, and it's an opportunity that's there, and that, yes, you can push forward. But the great thing that the moment we're in at the moment right now is it's a new medium, and normally the directors that are into it are very curious, right? It's not the more I wouldn't call them the dinosaurs, but the more traditional filmmakers, but you know, from one end of the spectrum, you have people like Felix and Paul and other directors that have totally dedicated themselves to this medium, and you've got more and more very creative filmmakers that are interested in this new art form. So they're all suddenly very, very open to the the creative possibilities of sound, and I think that's super interesting. And one thing I was noticing last week, Varun and I were on another panel, and the three sound people, we were all from a post-production background, and all of us had to learn to train ourselves to do production audio, which is, something I have so much respect for, and is a profession in itself. And it really because there was no standards, there was no tools are starting. I mean, microphones, name it, whatever. So you really have to since you know what you're going to do in post-production informs the way you're going to record on set. And so, to me, that's been extremely interesting and a creative opportunity.
I'd like to follow up with that, actually. As we've talked a little bit about pre-production, and you're talking about production, and I think that same that workflow, as we continue on into post-production, things have changed a little bit, especially when we're talking about how we would normally work as a game audio, or interactive audio with traditional post-production. Now we're talking about how do we get a traditional post-production facility getting content for nonlinear media or linear spatial media. That's changed. That's new. Foley has to be done differently. Dialogue mixing has to be done differently. All these considerations, and it's an important part to plan out early on as you're storyboarding and planning where do we want to have viewers look, what field of view, or what's going to be in their field of view, and knowing, well, what's outside that field of view. And how do we use sound to draw us either away, our attention outside of that field of view, or keep it focused within that. And that planning, that helps set the pace and the tone for the workflow to the end.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you had to just segue a bit into mixing, do you have what I'm trying to get at is the use of sort of spatial audio and headlocked audio. There's been lots of discussions around that. Have there been any sort of specific cases? Do you have rules for when you use them, or does it tend to vary per project?
Whatever makes sense for the project, that's the key. And that's, again, going back to why that conversation is so important, is what the creative determines the tools, not the other way around.
I would say, I don't know if you guys will agree, but a general rule is if a sound is in that space, there has to be a source for it. I mean, you're gonna look for it. If it's a voiceover and you position it there, then I'm expecting someone. If music is suddenly diegetic, if it's playing in that space, better make sense from that scene, right? If I'm in the middle of a forest, it would be quite surprising.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, when we talk about spatial audio creating presence, it does. You're right, absolutely. And having non-diegetic audio is a great way to actually intentionally pull somebody out of that space. It's a creative way to lose that presence, to get that emotion that you wouldn't normally get. That's what non-diegetic, like music especially, can give you.
Do you ever find that, say, like your typical background score played on a headlock track actually detracts from the spatial audio mix that you've done? And how do you end up getting that balance that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it's diegetic, if it's in the scene, it should be spatialized. Non-spatialized audio, if it's not from a creative standpoint, if it's not a creative choice, it can definitely detract.
Yeah, but how does it influence the other elements that are actually spatialized in the mix? Because one of the issues sometimes we run into is you've got your typical sort of Hollywood score blaring on your non-diegetic or headlock track, and you've got your amazing spatial audio mix, but as soon as you write that music up, you're eating into all that space and detracting away from it. So any experiences to share on that front?
Yeah, well, we have an experience coming out, I think, this week, Cirque du Soleil Ka, and that's a good case of, I wouldn't say fail, but it's a good challenge, meaning and that's one of the issues with 360, right? If you're going to do content for 360 for VR, you'll want to use all that space around you. So if there's a lot happening, and this is Chinese mythology, so there's a lot of there's battles, and in that, so that frequency bandwidth is limited. And when you add a music score, it just, yeah, it really can become a problem. So it's new, I would say, new challenges in mixing that you didn't have before, right? A good 2D mix, or even Atmos, is all about focus. I think that's one of the very important criteria, and it's a challenge to achieve right now.
I just wanted to add too that, you know, this goes back to post-production. If your composers and sound designers are speaking to each other and actually working together, you can mitigate some of these challenges. I can think of a couple of instances of some projects we've worked on where our headlock soundtracks work well in a space primarily because the score was written very specifically to the scenes, so it really does work. And also we found that generally if you mix things down a little bit quieter in the soundtrack and in the music than you would maybe in a film, that actually helps to focus things a little bit, not dramatically, but just 3 dB can do it. But I can think of a couple of really great pieces of content where actually there is spatialized music in the scene, but it's more of a procedural type thing where as you're moving through the space, and that can work as well. I think it really goes back to the content itself and really how you thoughtfully approach the music and the sound as a whole is also a big part of the equation.
Yeah, coming from the post perspective, especially since several of the 360 video projects that I've worked on evolved out of existing film franchises where I was sort of given assets, and one of those assets happens to be a fully mixed film score, we learned very quickly that what is scored for a film, which is scored for a screen, does not work in a 360 video, the spatial audio mix aside. So the two things that I'm most interested in, both working with personally experimenting, but also seeing done from actually the composition and arrangement side, is composing score for 360 video experiences or VR experiences. You're not just composing for, I think before you've talked about the field of audition being greater than this 30% that we're used to seeing on the movie screen. Well, that's what the composer is scoring for, is really the 30% that's on the screen. And what we do in post is we pull that music back into the room to sort of fill the auditorium. We don't want to pull the score back into the space when we're doing a 360 video or a VR mix. So really what we need to see is, writing and arranging and recording scores in new ways that actually support the fact that it's a surround immersive experience. Some of that may also leverage the types of instrumentation that the composer chooses in terms of loudness and frequency content. I tried to put a traditional film mix into a 360 video, and I tried to turn it down 3 dB, but it was a loud, bombastic track. When I turned it down, it sounded like I was playing the music too quiet. And there's a certain amount of headroom, so I can only turn the sound effects up so far.
Content matters.
But an interesting idea that we've sort of been thinking about at Skywalker is the concept of not necessarily spatializing score, but externalizing it. Looking at ways in which we can process the film sound to maybe make it sound more like what we're used to when we sit in an auditorium and we hear score, because the score and the sound effects, which we believe are actually attached to the world, sort of exist in the same space. And so can we author that same sort of soundscape where we can have a spatial audio mix that doesn't necessarily have to compete with the score, the non-diegetic music, but can coexist? So is there a way we could have headlocked music, but push it out in such a way that it doesn't collapse our sound field and doesn't impair the fidelity of the spatial audio mix? So those are some of our perspectives on ways that we can sort of work together with music, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a competition or a battle.
I would like to kind of extend that too. We're talking about mixing, we're talking about frequencies, and I think this is maybe a great opportunity in this forum to talk about how pacing has changed now, and we mix to match pacing, we mix to help that flow. And this is not to say that there are hard and fast rules, we all know that with VR, but generally speaking, there are fewer cuts, there are fewer edits. And music and sound alike can help weave that together, create that pacing, create that movement through a scene and through the story that maybe we've lost, and help not only just with the spatialization and frequency and the mix and everything, but also just the story and the throughput of that creativity.
So if we had to move into publishing, I think we had this Victor and I had this conversation, I think a few weeks ago, where we talked about the audio sound designer almost being in charge of post-production in a way and leading that role. Another point that Kevin mentioned earlier, where you quite often don't know what format you're mixing to, what your target platform is, and what those specs are. So how do each of you actually go about planning projects where you don't know what that endpoint is?
You want to take that?
So, coming from the film world, when I was working as a mix assistant at Skywalker, we would talk with the post-production supervisor and the sound supervisor on the show, and the client would give us a deliverables list. What I've been doing in VR is generating the deliverables list for the client. So in some cases, I've actually said, well, you're not sure what platform you're targeting. Here are the 4 major platforms, and here are the 4 mixes that I would deliver. Let me know sooner rather than later if you have an idea of which one of those they might be. And if you won't know till the last minute, I'll maybe target a mix that is easier to get onto all of the platforms. If there's not, one type of mix that can hit all of the platforms, I'll do my best to be open-ended. I don't want to paint myself into a corner. So yeah, it is a challenge, and like I mentioned before, your post-production team are now your audio team. They're actually your friends. Talk to them early. They might actually help you figure out what your deliverables are and how you can get there easily.
Especially as we move out of the Wild West. As formats, we're not saying we need standards, but as they coalesce a little bit together, that's starting to happen. But things change, and with post, there's been versioning is not new, and the goal is to find and use the tools in a way that allows us to quickly version a mix.
Yep. Have you had cases where you've got a brief where it's supposed to be a video, but it actually feels more like it should be a game-like experience? Because I've seen lots of conversations where you
had it both ways, the other way.
Yeah,
too.
or the other way around as well. And so, have you found yourselves having sort of a key decision in what that's going to be like, simply because of what is achievable through sound or not?
Repeat that.
Have you found yourself actually influencing what that final piece is going to be, whether it's going to be an interactive or a linear experience, or is that usually left sort of further up the chain?
Generally, that's driven by the directors,
Yeah.
project directors, or the traditional film directors. So yeah, that's usually our job is to interpret those goals and execute on it with audio, and like Kevin said, provide as much information and options.
Yep.
So the projects that we tend to work on at the Sound Lab at Technicolor are already fully formed in terms of the overall creative. We help them with platforms and understanding what options there are, but our job is to deliver generally.
The typical thing I hear from producers is, well, I wanted to work on all platforms, right? Which, sure, I mean,
everywhere.
It's totally normal to expect that, right? It's like that in traditional mediums. I feel part of the work we do is trying to find a way for a mix to in an experience to what I call degrade gracefully. So if you want to push the full-blown experience on the Rift or high-end platforms, and perhaps you want a version that's good but doesn't have all the bells and whistles and for Gear VR, and then there's YouTube, which only supports spatial audio, not concurrent playback. So let them know whether sometimes lower their expectations and try to find creative solutions with those constraints.
Yep. So, Kevin and Victor, since you work in larger post-production facilities, you've also got this knowledge transfer step that needs to happen when you're working with people who don't come from VR backgrounds or are new to it for the first time. Any interesting sort of tips there to ease other people into the workflow? How do you communicate with them if they haven't really worked within this medium previously?
Sure, yeah. We have a great Foley team on the Paramount lot, the Technicolor facility on the Paramount lot. And we've worked with them before with games and other interactive, so there's a relationship already. But when we're working with those folks, and including in dialogue mixers, some of the workflow is different, and they're excited to work on these projects and learn new. But we need to direct it and say, this is how we different. You know, if you're mixing for TV, they're going to mix. Generally, they're going to mix dialogue to the center channel. We can't have that. So Foley needs to be done separately, and it's just about a line of communication and working back and forth and giving examples. That's the key. But yeah, it's definitely a fun challenge, especially when you're bringing this dynamic, interactive development process into a large post facility. But it's just about communication and setting expectations.
Yep.
Yeah, our goal from the outset at Skywalker, as we started to bring on more of the 360 video and immersive and interactive projects, was to continue to leverage all of the skills and expertise and the history that we have. You know, some people think that with spatial audio and VR, we kind of need to throw out everything we know and figure it out again. And you know, we don't believe that's the case, and we think there's a rich history from film sound, and certainly some things work and some things don't, and there's a learning curve there. And you know, I actually had a background in interactive audio from video games, and I think there's a rich history there. And there's certain things that work, and there's certain things that don't. But you know, something that actually helps us have a shared language is the fact that, you know, about 5 years ago when I started working at Skywalker Sound, we started to see the first immersive theatrical film formats, which really introduced the concept of object-based audio to a lot of the film mixers and the editors and the designers. And that's actually been, in retrospect, a huge blessing from breaking us out of the thought of working in a sort of traditional channel-based environment and started to think of things as a sound field. And at Skywalker, you know, maybe by virtue of the fact that some of the types of content that we were working on, we really got to utilize the immersive sound formats for cinema in a way that helped us make it feel as if there was an entire world that was happening that wasn't on the screen. And we always had to be careful to sort of rein it in to not distract from the amazing visual effects and from the director's vision. But some films were actually starting to be, you know, written and designed in such a way that the audience is actually sort of inside the movie or inside the scene, which was very different from the audiences experiencing the director's vision through the lens of the camera. And so we had already started to see that sort of shift in both the creative and technical thinking. And so that's the sort of language and the vocabulary that I can build off of when I present something like a fully interactive, you know, non-timeline based product to a traditional film mixer or a designer. I can say, well, you know, it's like that immersive film that you did, but now we just have variable timing in between the scenes or the sequences. And so in a way, that's actually really helped sort of lower the learning curve. And so besides the fact that most people, the first time that they see VR, are actually excited and they see what the applications are and how engaging it can be, they're actually excited to learn more as opposed to sort of threatened. And no one has ever dismissed any of the content that I've shown them as sort of being like a novelty, like, oh, this isn't as cool as I thought. Everyone says, oh, this is way cooler than I thought it was. I want to learn more. You know, how can we contribute our skills and knowledge?
Yeah. It's all about building that ecosystem, both as sound folk and as VR developers and filmmakers. And like you've mentioned before, you've gone and learned about production sound. I think that learning happens all around, and it's critical.
Are there any since from my understanding, you almost have a self-contained team, and you worked from pre-production all the way down to post-production. Have you found similar experiences where you had to train up your team, bring them up to speed?
I just love to work with traditional audio people on set, and as you said, Victor, they're super excited, right? Except the boom guy, because. But seriously, yeah, everyone's super excited, right? When was the last time we had a new medium? It's great. And one thing for me, I found that's coming back is something that existed in Hollywood in the 50s. It might sound pompous, but it's an audio director. And I really feel that VR, since it's such a new medium, it's great to work hand in hand with the director and complement his vision, which is always what we've done. But I think coming back to less of a segmentation since there's no known workflow that's been working for so long, it's great to come back to each department and actually put your hands, work on every stage. It really informs the before and after, definitely.
Yep. Just got a last question on production sounds. If you just talked about it, the most common question we get asked is, how do I actually go about doing production sound, whether it's a small shoot or whether it's a larger shoot? How do you go about planning?
Yeah, with ambisonics being such a buzzword, we get asked, can I just get an ambisonic mic and put it in the center? Is that going to work? Is that enough? And that would be great to have a one-size-fits-all tool. I love one-size-fits-all tools. They just don't exist. And we always recommend and use lav mics. We treat each actor like an object when we plan it that way. And the ambisonic mics are great for capturing an environment and a sound field from the camera's perspective, but that's really it, treating every actor like an object.
Yep. For those of you who don't know what an ambisonic mic is, it's if you think of a 360 video camera that captures video as a sphere, an ambisonic mic does something similar for audio. It's captured in a format that can then be played back in this sort of sphere of sound around the camera that can then be rotated based on what you're looking at.
And to me, it's really essential. It's the canvas I paint the rest on. And I feel when I don't have it, it's really hard to achieve a sound design, a final mix that feels as immersive, especially depth, and it's just. It really ties everything up, and it's really the main challenge when you work with a camera team, and you're like, well, I'm gonna have to put that microphone on top of well, you just put it under. No, sorry, it won't work. Because you really have to get the same point of addition as you have the point of view. Because if I'm seeing here and the microphone is there, if a character comes really close, the person just won't be at the right place. And our brains are so incredibly good and precise. I mean, I think you can, in that field of view, there a 2% difference in the azimuth, it's wrong. It's not exactly where it should be. And you don't have to be a tone meister for this. We're all super tone meisters as far as that's concerned. So that I feel spatial audio recording is really critical. Yeah. And one of the big challenges we have in post, and I'm sure you guys had it, is repositioning all these characters. So, of course, you want lav mics if you're doing fiction, especially, but we spend an awful lot of time painstakingly repositioning elevation, azimuth, distance, and I think these are the kind of tools we're going to see in the coming couple of years, ways to actually localize these points in space, get that metadata, ingest it, and then focus on the creative.
Yep. I'd like to open it up to any questions from the audience. There's a microphone up there where you can walk up to. It'd be great if you can speak into it so it makes its way into the recording.
Hey. Thank you, by the way. Great presentation here. Spatial audio, from a design perspective, I find it's actually easier in some ways for a designer, for a sound designer, because it's designing hyper. So you have the ability to actually take something that's not from the camera and actually place them in where your brain might think it actually is. So there's that. However, I'm curious, maybe just briefly, and JP, you sort of touched on some things speaking about localization, but maybe some personal technical challenges that you're finding for yourself on these projects that are maybe inhibiting your current design process in this environment.
Well, the project that's coming out, the Cirque, I mean, we worked really hard on it. Don't get me wrong. I'm really happy about the mix. However, we faced a new challenge, which is there's things happening all around you. So that's a lot of sound. Then you have a music score. I feel it's just too much. And I think we need something it's been, happening in VR, not VR, but gaming world, is HDR mix. Probably a capability to focus, focus on what the person is looking at. Perhaps the rest is a couple of dBs lower, and then be able to have some objects supersede that, because if you have an audio cue, for instance, you want to make sure the viewer doesn't miss that cue. I think that's the kind of things that probably could help us. But there's plenty of challenge at each project, and that's the reason I'm liking it so much, actually. Yeah, it's really for problem solvers at the moment. Yeah. I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert Hernandez. I'm a digital journalism professor at USC, and I've been teaching VR journalism for the last year or so. And in VR journalism, we have butchered the craft of audio storytelling. Even though we teach our students audio is the backbone of storytelling, we have totally butchered it because we're producing really quickly, running and gunning. And so I've been trying to find a way to crack that nut, to produce quickly and turn it around quickly. Granted, strapping up a H2 and zoom captures a little bit, but what experience do you guys have in terms of turning around something rich in audio? How quickly have you turned things around, and any tips on that? Thank you.
I actually think for certain projects it may be a benefit to have it rough. If you want to capture that realism, and I think journalism is a great place for that. I think it could be a benefit. Getting a high quality version of it. I mean, for sure, it's not. Generally, what we're talking about is the hyper real, the Hollywood illusion sound, and you can create that illusion of authenticity as well. But I think just keep thinking of it in terms of how is this benefiting it? How is this limitation? How can I use it to my benefit?
I feel your pain. It's such a great medium for journalism, right? I mean, if I were a journalist, I totally want to get into this. And the problem right now is the tools, right? I mean, having a great small camera that allows you to, without think about it, record good quality spatial audio and video. I mean, there's Diazo that's there at the moment. They were first to market, good to them. It's not perfect, but then iteration. But if it can get even smaller, I think that's what we want, right, for journalists. I mean, you guys have to be able. You have your editors. I mean, it's right. Such a complex profession, but I feel it's a wonderful medium, especially for in the action live pieces, and where you really want to be able to publish this in a matter of hours, right? Yep. So I wish I had great tips, but let's just wait on the right hardware in the coming year, hopefully.
Hello, my name is Bill Myers. I come from Cleveland, Ohio. I work at a small VR design company called Delight Studios. The thing we're running into is we can create some really neat visual experiences with virtual reality. What we're struggling with is the whole surprise and delight factor for audio. We don't have much, I guess, gear at our disposal. Do you have any tips or tricks for a small studio like mine where we can bring that surprise and delight factor to our audience on a budget?
Are you talking about production or post-production?
post-production.
Download the Spatial Audio workstation.
It's free.
It's free.
Right?
So are you a sound designer on the team? Do you have a sound designer on your team?
We do have access to, the thing is it's a bunch of shotgun microphones, and we just need to get crafty in post, and I didn't know if you guys had any tips on.
Well, there's very affordable ambisonic microphones. I mean, if $1,000 is in your budget, I mean, it's fairly accessible. I won't name any brands, but you can. I would invite you to. So, if any of you people are interested, of course, Varun talked about the Facebook group for the Facebook 360 Spatial Workstation. There's also another group which we're all part of and discuss actively. Is called Spatial Audio in VR. It's So I would say bring that question or read the answers and search for it. There's plenty of people with that same issue.
I just want to make a point about, visual delight also requires quite a lot of effort and design, and it's the same for audio. Quite often just sticking a microphone and capturing that and playing that back only gets us so far, and then you need to go in and actually craft that wow factor in, and that's where I guess we all spend our time mostly working at.
Yeah, and to extend on that same thought, that's where I was headed. You know, if you're not having the conversations with your sound designer early, you should. That it doesn't mean that if your budget is low, you don't have to consider bringing them early and keeping them on the entire time. You know, we come on projects early, we have discussions, we help, we get them ready, we get ready, and we can come back later. There's a lot of ways to work, and I think in addition to recording high quality audio on set, and I think the discussion and the tools, using the spatialized workstation, but that discussion is almost the best return on value on your investment, I think, that you could have.
What's really great, actually, I mean, I'm jealous of you guys, obviously, working in huge facilities with incredible mixing rooms, but I mix on headphones, you know, and that's amazing. It's just like Project Studio. You can actually do great projects using minimal investment. That's really disruptive, and I appreciate that.
Hello. Thank you guys also. This is incredibly informative, interesting. This topic, my name's Peter Ackerman. I'm with Skydance Interactive. So I had a couple questions sort of from the perspective of a game maker. That's where we're coming from. And there's a little collection of questions here, so I'll try and package them up. So first is about the applicability of this sort of ambisonic, I guess, tracking to a real-time game application. Now you think, well, it's a game. You know where everything is. Why not just do it all in real time? Well, you can, but on the visual side, you know, you can render everything in real time too. But pre-baking stuff is a totally go-to technique for game designers to optimize and be able to get vast and complex things that feel just as good as the real thing when you know they're static. So I would imagine that this technique could be very powerful at creating a rich, you know, typically a game has a little bit of dynamic stuff and a whole lot of static stuff, that one could use this technique in a game to provide a rich, totally spatialized sound field of the background and then layer on top dynamic elements. So now, with that context, a couple of questions. One, are the current techniques for baking down a sound field to a set of streams sort of full precision the same way that stereo is full precision? Like good stereo allows you to close your eyes and, as you say, pick out to within a couple of degrees exactly where every element is. You can hear the lion and the tiger, and they're next to each other. You can tell which is to the left or to the right. Do you get that same quality of precision with these spatialized audio formats where in VR I'd be able to turn my head, you know, and still retain that kind of accuracy, even though it's all been baked down into these fixed tracks? And then the second question would be, does your SDK for all this spatialization stuff, is it performant enough to use elements of it in real time, and do you guys make it available for that? So those are the questions. Thanks.
Yeah, to answer your second question, yes, it is. It's the same SDK that's in all the Facebook apps, so yes. I'd also encourage you to come for a talk tomorrow by Pete Sterling and Thomas Merton from Oculus, who are specifically tackling your first question, which is using ambisonic audio and baking that in for things like ambience and so on within game engines, and they're going to get into a lot of detail about it. So I think you'll find a lot of answers to your first question in tomorrow's talk. Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got a few seconds for the last question.
Hi, I'm Monty and I work for our Citrix research team. So our team focuses more on live 360 video and audio streaming. So I'm wondering if you're planning to apply some of the technique used in Workstation to live streaming, because it can be really noisy when we're streaming a live event, and it's hard for the attendee to focus on the people who is talking. So is there any technique that we can improve this live streaming experience, or any tricks that we can use from post-production?
I know some people who've actually used the tools in real time to sort of pipe in microphone inputs from a live scenario and then get the audio out and have done things with it, but it hasn't been built sort of yet for that kind of a scenario. Have any of you had any experience with live? Okay.
I think that's a whole. We're talking about we're talking about overcoming reality, and I think what you're talking about is how to use psychoacoustics to accentuate reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for the live streaming VR is going to be the combining of things like sound field recordings with the objects. And so in the way that we talk about how in game audio we've got positional metadata, but how in rendered 360 video maybe we don't have the positional metadata. I know there are companies that are looking at things like positional tracking of microphones so that you can actually have that real-time metadata, and I can see those technologies probably evolving in ways that we can combine, individual speaker labs with sound field recordings and help with some of those things with mixed clarity, which, from a post perspective, we can play the same clip over and over and over again and repan that object until it aligns with the sound field. But in live, you don't have that luxury. So I think we're going to have to wait for technologies to help with the positioning.
Yeah, and long throw parabolic mics, a whole audio holography too.
That's really more of a broadcast question, and we're definitely not spatialists, but I would incite you to look towards things like MPEG-H 3D audio, Dolby AC4, and there's probably DTS have their own flavor of it, but that's really targeted towards live broadcasting and with 3D audio.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Varun.